Bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour, je me présente, je suis Sylvie Belleville, je suis directrice du centre de recherche de l'Institut universitaire de gériatrie de Montréal, du CIUS Centre-Sud de Montréal. Alors, il me fait vraiment plaisir de vous accueillir aujourd'hui pour célébrer le 35e anniversaire du centre de recherche et aussi pour célébrer, bien sûr, l'innovation au service des aînés. Et je vais agir ce matin à titre de maîtresse de cérémonie pour les allocutions inaugurales. Et j'aimerais d'abord inviter Madame Sonia Bélanger, qui est présidente directrice générale du CIUS.
Alors, bon matin, merci Sylvie. Alors, chers étudiants, chercheurs, professionnels de recherche, cliniciens, alors, une fois de plus, je suis très fière d'être ici ce matin pour ce colloque sur l'innovation au service des aînés. Et je suis d'autant plus heureuse que c'est en même temps le 35e anniversaire du centre de recherche de l'IUGM. 35 ans. Alors, déjà, donc, beaucoup de travail qui a été fait pour, justement, amener des nouvelles connaissances, développer pour le bénéfice des aînés. Avant de débuter, j'aimerais remercier et souligner la présence du Dr Christian Baron, vice-doyen recherche et développement de la Faculté de médecine de l'Université de Montréal, Dr Baron, Dr Sébastien Sauvé, vice-doyen recherche et création à la Faculté des arts et sciences de l'Université de Montréal, Dr Daniel Lajeunesse, vice-recteur adjoint, directeur du bureau de recherche, développement, valorisation, Université de Montréal, Sylvie Belleville, bien sûr, notre directrice scientifique, Madame Sonika, je ne sais pas si elle est ici ce matin, mais elle se joindra à nous, qui est la directrice de la Fondation de l'Institut de gériatrie, et Madame Simard, Sylvie, qui est la directrice de l'enseignement au CIUS Centre-Sud. J'en profite aussi pour remercier les membres du comité organisateur. Ce colloque permettra un partage d'expertise et d'expériences provenant de différentes cultures. Nous aurons la chance d'entendre des gens du Canada, des États-Unis, de l'Inde. Des sujets comme la prévention, les soins et la réadaptation gériatrique, la neuroscience du vieillissement, interpellent particulièrement la communauté internationale et la mise en commun de vos réflexions alimentera, j'en suis certaine, des échanges particulièrement riches et inspirants. La recherche a toujours été au cœur de la tradition de l'Institut universitaire de gériatrie de Montréal, qui est dévoué envers l'excellence et l'innovation depuis sa création. Créé en 1982, son centre de recherche est un des plus grands centres de recherche sur le vieillissement au niveau de la francophonie. En ces célébrations de notre 35e anniversaire, j'ai une pensée toute spéciale pour le fondateur, Dr André Roch-Lecourt. Effectivement, Dr Lecourt a grandement influencé les soins et les services dédiés aux personnes âgées au cours de sa carrière. Ces sujets de recherche visaient principalement le vieillissement cérébral et l'aphasie chez les personnes âgées. Il incarne encore aujourd'hui l'aventure scientifique et le dévouement professionnel à l'amélioration de la condition humaine. Je ne peux non plus passer sous silence les implications de Dr Yves Joannette, professeur titulaire à la Faculté de médecine, qui a aussi été directeur du centre ici pendant plusieurs années, et de Dr Jarema, professeur titulaire au département de linguistique de l'Université de Montréal, qui sont tous les deux chercheurs au centre de recherche depuis 1982. Grâce à leur savoir, ils ont grandement inspiré les pratiques du centre pluridisciplinaire. Les fondateurs et contributeurs d'exception sont nombreux au CRI-UGM et nous leur devons maintenant ce carrefour du savoir et de l'innovation. Les chercheurs qui s'y investissent sont profondément engagés et travaillent ardemment pour répondre aux besoins de la population vieillissante. Cet apport pour la population est d'une valeur inestimable. À travers les années, le CRI-UGM est allé chercher des appuis importants de taille dans la communauté, ce qui lui a assuré d'avoir les moyens de ses ambitions et d'accueillir des professionnels de recherche dans ses infrastructures de pointe. Le groupe Maurice, d'ailleurs, nous sommes dans l'auditorium du groupe Maurice, est d'ailleurs un partenaire essentiel au développement des connaissances scientifiques sur le vieillissement. C'est donc avec la plus grande des fiertés que je célèbre aujourd'hui ce legs des 35 dernières années et que j'entrevois aussi l'avenir avec beaucoup d'enthousiasme et beaucoup de projets. Dès sa création en 2015, le CIUS Centre-Sud, partenaire de proximité du prix UGM, a fait de la recherche une de ses composantes centrales, avec maintenant près de 350 chercheurs œuvrant dans différents domaines, notamment en gériatrie. Notre CIUS est maintenant un pôle important de recherche scientifique au Québec. Chef de file dans les pratiques cliniques, les soins spécialisés, le développement des connaissances sur le vieillissement et la santé des personnes âgées, l'IUGM est aussi une composante importante de notre organisation. En terminant, j'aimerais prendre le temps de saluer particulièrement Sylvie Belleville, notre directrice scientifique et collaboratrice précieuse pour la mission de l'enseignement et de la recherche. Alors voilà, je vous souhaite à tous un excellent colloque et je sais que c'est sur 2 journées. Il y aura donc des gens qui s'ajouteront au fur et à mesure. Alors, bonne journée à tous et bon colloque.
Merci, Madame Bélanger. J'aimerais maintenant accueillir Madame Sylvie Simard, qui est directrice de l'enseignement universitaire et de la recherche dans notre CIUS. Alors, merci. Mesdames, Messieurs, bonjour. Ça me fait... c'est un grand plaisir pour moi d'être parmi vous ce matin pour ce colloque qui s'inscrit dans le contexte des célébrations du 35e anniversaire du Centre de recherche de l'IUGM. Alors, depuis sa création par André Roch-Lecourt, comme l'évoquait Madame Bélanger, le Centre de recherche a connu un parcours marqué par l'excellence des travaux qui y sont menés, ce qui a permis de se positionner en véritable chef de file. Les chercheurs du Centre de recherche de l'IUGM comptent parmi les plus influents dans le domaine du vieillissement et de la promotion de la santé, et ce, tant au Québec qu'à l'international. Grâce au leadership de ces chercheurs, le CRIUGM compte actuellement 12 chaires de recherche. Il accueille de plus dans ses murs 4 réseaux nationaux de recherche. Le réseau canadien pour la déprescription, dirigé par Dr. Cara Tannenbaum, le Consortium pour l'identification précoce de la maladie d'Alzheimer, dirigé par Sylvie Belleville et dont la cohorte clinique qui est associée est dirigée par Dr. Marie-Jeanne Kergoat. Des équipes du Consortium canadien en neurodégénérescence associée au vieillissement, dirigées par Pierre Bellec, Sylvie Belleville, Louis Bérère, Dr. Marie-André Bruneau. Et le réseau canadien sur le sommeil et les rythmes circadiens, dirigé par Julie Carrier. De plus, grâce à la renommée de 2 chercheurs, le CRIUGM est le seul centre de recherche au Canada à accueillir 2 instituts de recherche en santé du Canada, l'Institut sur le vieillissement sous la direction scientifique d'Yves Jeannette et l'Institut de la santé des femmes et des hommes dirigé par Dr. Cara Tannenbaum. Évidemment, tout ce succès n'aurait pu être possible sans l'engagement, l'énergie, la détermination des équipes qui œuvrent au centre de recherche. Alors, je veux remercier les chercheurs, les professionnels, tout le personnel et les étudiants qui, depuis 35 ans, se sont investis et ont contribué à faire avancer les connaissances scientifiques qui nous permettent de mieux vieillir. Enfin, je veux remercier aussi la directrice scientifique, Mme Sylvie Belleville, qui contribue à développer le centre de recherche sur des assises solides laissées par ses prédécesseurs. Elle a de grandes ambitions pour le CRIUGM, comme en témoigne le nouveau plan de développement qu'elle vient tout juste de déposer au Fonds de recherche du Québec. C'est un plaisir pour moi de collaborer avec elle. En terminant, je fais le souhait, comme c'est la coutume pour un anniversaire, que le Centre de recherche poursuive sur cette voie avec tout l'enthousiasme et le succès qu'on lui connaît. Le CRIUGM, par ses découvertes et les applications qui en découlent, réinvente en quelque sorte le vieillissement et contribue à en faire une opportunité pour toute la société. Alors, bon colloque à tous et longue vie au Centre de recherche. Merci. Merci, Mme Simard. J'aimerais maintenant inviter Dr Daniel Lajeunesse, qui est vice-recteur adjoint au vice-rectorat à la recherche et directeur général du Bureau Recherche, Développement, Valorisation, bien connu sous le sigle BRDV. Voilà.
Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Ça me fait très plaisir d'être ici ce matin. Alors, Dr Belleville, merci de m'avoir invité. Ça me fait plaisir d'être ici. Pourquoi? Parce que le CRUMG, c'est un organisme fantastique qui joue un rôle fédérateur dans le développement de la recherche, la formation d'étudiants et la valorisation des connaissances dans un domaine qui est hautement prioritaire pour notre institution et pour la société québécoise, soit le vieillissement et les actions en faveur du bien vieillir et de la population. En effet, face aux impératifs de notre société, de ces enjeux démographiques, il devient impératif pour nous de bien comprendre les processus du vieillissement et de s'attarder aux solutions du bien vieillir. La recherche dans ce domaine qui est exercée ici au CRUMG est transversale et intersectorielle et interpelle plusieurs secteurs de recherche qui sont stratégiques pour l'Université de Montréal. D'ailleurs, le plan stratégique du CRUMG intègre des avancées en neurosciences, en réadaptation, en santé publique et en recherche clinique et est ainsi à la croisée des thèmes porteurs pour l'Université de Montréal, mais aussi pour le Québec. Son caractère résolument interdisciplinaire le place dans une position stratégique pour l'Université de Montréal. C'est un partenaire majeur pour la réalisation de grands projets du vice-rectorat à la recherche, dont je fais partie, et qui s'intitule « La vie repensée ». C'est un projet qui va embraser le cycle du vivant dans son ensemble, en tenant compte des extrêmes de la vie, et les recherches qui s'effectuent ici au sein du CRUMG s'alignent parfaitement avec la vision et la pensée de ce projet porteur. Les activités du CRUMG s'inscrivent aussi dans un autre projet du vice-rectorat à la recherche, au développement, à la création et à l'innovation. Vous voyez, très grand nom. Soit celui des données de l'action en santé, avec l'intégration des neurosciences cognitives dans la programmation scientifique d'Ivado-Apogée, qui va accélérer le développement et les applications de nouvelles méthodes d'analyse de données massives. Alors, votre présence aujourd'hui, ça témoigne de la vitalité et de l'importance des activités de ce centre de recherche à l'Université de Montréal, mais aussi au Québec. Vos réflexions, votre contribution à l'avancement des données de recherche et des applications de celles-ci dans nos actions quotidiennes contribuent à l'essor du Québec du 21e siècle. Mais ça s'inscrit d'abord et avant tout dans un souci de service à la collectivité. Ainsi, la recherche sur le maintien dans la communauté, soit le « aging in place », place le CRUMG parmi les centres d'excellence au Québec et sur la scène internationale et le distingue par sa capacité à s'adapter à des questions cruciales sur l'effet du vieillissement dans notre société et sur les ressources que notre système de santé devra déployer et sur notre capacité à s'adapter à ces nouvelles réalités sociétales. Le regard du CRUMG sur le rôle de nos aînés dans la société et sur leur implication est aussi au cœur de sa mission et des valeurs de l'Université de Montréal. Je vous souhaite aujourd'hui des échanges, aujourd'hui et demain, puisque c'est sur 2 journées, je vous souhaite aujourd'hui des échanges stimulants et innovateurs, et par-dessus tout, de développer de nouvelles visions pour notre société qui comptent sur vous pour lui suggérer des nouvelles idées, de nouvelles perspectives et de nouveaux défis pour bien vieillir en santé. Alors, bonne journée et bon colloque.
Merci, Dr Lajeunesse. J'aimerais maintenant inviter Dr Christian Baron. Christian Baron est vice-doyen à la recherche et au développement de la faculté de médecine de l'Université de Montréal.
Madame la PDG de SIUS du Sud de l'île de Montréal, Madame la directrice de l'enseignement universitaire et de la recherche, Madame la directrice scientifique de CR de l'IGM, Monsieur le vice-recteur adjoint, chers collègues, étudiants et invités. Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation et je suis très content d'être ici avec vous pour le colloque de l'IGM à l'occasion du 35e anniversaire universitaire. Un institut qui, on parle de 35 ans, qui est quand même assez jeune, peut-être certainement en pleine maturité maintenant. Et le titre de votre colloque, « Innovation au service des aînés », reflète très bien la nature très dynamique de votre centre qui, sous la leadership de la directrice, Dr Sylvie Belleville, qui est épaulée par des chefs d'axe neurosciences du vieillissement, Madame Anna-Inés Ansaldo, et promotion de la santé, soins et interventions pilotées par Nathalie Bia. Dans le contexte actuel du changement démographique de notre population, il est clair que le CRUGM se positionne comme un centre d'excellence au Québec et sur la scène internationale pour comprendre et répondre à l'effet du vieillissement de la population sur notre système de santé, sur les ressources qu'il faudra déployer pour soigner et mieux soutenir les personnes âgées ou encore pour mieux définir le rôle, renouveler ce que pourront jouer les aînés dans notre société. Avec ces 53 chercheurs, l'IGM exerce un leadership vigoureux en recherche et en formation dans le domaine du vieillissement et les domaines connexes au sein de notre réseau universitaire. Ce leadership donne lieu à de multiples collaborations avec divers réseaux de recherche provinciaux et centres du FAQS. Comme beaucoup parmi vous le savent, la demande de renouvellement au FAQS vient d'être envoyée, mais franchement, je n'ai aucun doute que les évaluations que vous allez recevoir au début de l'année, des évaluations de la performance et de la pertinence de centre vont être assez excellentes comme lors des derniers renouvellements. Il est clair que vous avez des défis, bien sûr, comme tout le monde, dû à la décroissance du financement de la recherche au fédéral, mais nous attendons, espérons tous qu'il y aura un virage au budget fédéral, comme on a déjà vu, heureusement, au budget provincial, qui a augmenté d'une façon significative le soutien à la recherche. Et comme vous savez aussi, le FAQS est une réflexion. Il y a aussi d'autres financements, au moins au niveau provincial, qui s'en viennent. La restructuration du système de la santé, évidemment, posait des défis pour vous, mais je pense que vous êtes maintenant très bien placés et intégrés. Il y a aussi des nouvelles opportunités pour la recherche intersectorielle au sein du CIUS du Centre-Sud de l'île de Montréal. C'est avec plaisir que nous avons soutenu vos infrastructures majeures, juste par exemple comme l'unité en neuroimagerie, et nous appuyons fortement vos projets pour l'avenir, comme par exemple juste une initiative pour amener la recherche du laboratoire vers la communauté du quartier qui va via la construction d'un nouveau pavillon pour créer un quartier innovant. Dans ce contexte, peut-être il y a aussi un projet majeur au Fonds d'innovation de la FCI pour vous à l'avenir. Comme vous avez déjà vu dans le cadre de la demande financée par le CRIR, votre secteur, votre domaine est tout à fait éligible et je vous encourage à mener ce genre de réflexion. Vous le faites sans aucun doute déjà et on va se reparler bien sûr. Je finis avec quelques bons coups que nous avons remarqués, certainement sans vouloir dévaloriser les excellents travaux d'autres qui sont bien documentés. En premier temps, il faut juste mentionner le succès de Sylvie Belleville au concours Fondation des IRSC. Sylvie est vraiment une directrice très dynamique qui est un leader et un des meilleurs leaders font le lead par exemple, n'est-ce pas? Alors félicitations. J'aimerais aussi mentionner le Dr Gagné, qui est ici avec nous, qui a obtenu une chaire philanthropique très très bien dotée de la Fondation Caroline Durand, qui est la première pour l'école d'orthophonie et audiologie et nous sommes très très fiers de cet accomplissement. Nathalie Bier, qui a décroché une subvention importante des IRSC et du CRSNG pour la recherche en gérontotechnologie pour permettre aux personnes âgées de vivre à la maison. Et je ne peux pas finir sans mentionner Anna-Inès Ansaldo qui mène des recherches sur le bilingualisme et le vieillissement, une thématique qui attire beaucoup d'attention des médias pour des bonnes raisons et qui serait très bien dans notre ville qui connaît une croissance assez importante de la population bilingue, mais même multilingue en ce moment, comme vous savez tous. L'UDM, je finis en disant l'UDM est et demeure évidemment une institution francophone, mais qui s'affiche désormais comme université de Montréal et du monde. Et dans ce sens, je vous remercie tous et toutes. Gracias de nuevo por la invitación. Es un gran placer estar aquí con ustedes et je vous souhaite un excellent collègue plein d'échanges productifs. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Barry. Dr. Sauvé n'a pas pu se présenter, je crois, ce matin. Alors, je vais inviter Dr. Pierrette Gaudreault, qui est directrice du Réseau québécois de recherche sur le vieillissement, à nous dire un mot.
Bonjour à tous. Très chère Sylvie, mesdames les directrices, distingués invités, chers chercheurs et étudiants. Alors, il me fait vraiment plaisir et je suis très fière d'être ici associée, que le Réseau québécois de recherche sur le vieillissement soit associé au 35e anniversaire de fondation du Centre de recherche de l'IUGM. 35 ans, c'est jeune quand on travaille sur le vieillissement, mais pour plusieurs étudiants parmi vous, c'est quand même très loin. Certains d'entre vous n'étaient pas nés encore. Alors donc, nous avons vraiment un grand horizon devant nous. Je souhaite aujourd'hui souligner la vision et l'implication des directeurs qui ont bâti et développé le centre de recherche, du docteur André Roch-Lecourt à Yves Joannette, à Sylvie Belleville. Tous ont mis leur énergie et ont fait de ce centre un centre de renommée internationale. Par contre, ce que je voudrais porter comme message, c'est les meilleurs remerciements de la communauté des chercheurs et étudiants qui ont également fait de ce centre un institut de recherche et de formation de renom. Alors, merci à vous tous qui se sont succédés au cours des décennies pour vraiment bâtir une institution dont vous pouvez être très fiers aujourd'hui. Avec la relève de jeunes chercheurs et étudiants de haute qualité qui sont parmi vous, je souhaite que le centre de recherche soit porteur de grandes découvertes au cours des 35 prochaines années et que celles-ci soient au bénéfice de la population âgée québécoise et canadienne. Finalement, je voudrais souligner que le Réseau québécois de recherche sur le vieillissement sera toujours à votre côté, un allié financier, scientifique, dans les domaines de la santé cognitive et mentale, dans le domaine de la mobilité et dans le domaine du continuum de soins et services de santé. Alors, tous ensemble, nous allons faire en sorte que la recherche soit translationnelle, fructueuse et qu'elle serve vraiment au bien-être de nos personnes âgées que nous chérissons. Merci, félicitations à tous et un excellent colloque.
Merci, Dr. Gaudreau. Alors, écoutez, je remercie les personnes qui sont venues pour faire ces allocutions qui m'ont vraiment touchée et je pense qu'ils ont touché aussi les gens de la communauté du centre de recherche. Vous avez, il y a 2 jours de célébration autour de la science et des découvertes scientifiques et on a organisé notre colloque cette année autour de trios, c'est-à-dire que chacun des trios va parler d'une thématique particulière et comprend un chercheur du centre de recherche, un chercheur invité de grande renommée et un jeune chercheur, soit étudiant, stagiaire postdoctoral ou jeune chercheur. Alors, vous verrez, ça rend, je pense que ça va rendre la journée particulièrement intéressante. Et je voulais saluer nos chercheurs invités qui sont Dr. Patrick Corrigan, qui est de l'Illinois Institute of Technology, Sylvain Giroux, qui est de l'Université de Sherbrooke, Richard Robitaille, qui est du département de neurosciences à l'Université de Montréal, Dr. Lacroix, qui est de l'Université Laval, Dr. Ashley, qui est de l'Université du Kansas, Dr. Hampstead, qui est de l'Université du Michigan, et Dr. Aladi, qui est du National Institute of Mental Health de Bangalore. Alors, merci à vous tous d'avoir accepté notre invitation et merci évidemment à nos partenaires financiers, la Fondation de l'Institut de gériatrie de Montréal, le Réseau québécois de recherche sur le vieillissement, vice-rectorat à la recherche, Faculté des arts et sciences, Faculté de médecine, merci infiniment. Et on va commencer dès maintenant avec le premier trio qui est organisé par Dr. Jean-Pierre Gagné et Dr. Gagné va être le maître de cérémonie de ce trio. Donc, merci.
Bonjour tout le monde. Un peu plus grand. Bonjour tout le monde. Effectivement, c'est une belle occasion pour nous de présenter nos travaux, au moins dans un des domaines de recherche qu'on a entrepris il y a quelques années. Et c'est un vrai plaisir de pouvoir inviter des gens qu'on lit et des gens qu'on admire de loin pour venir se joindre à notre petit trio pour la séance de ce matin. Alors, on va commencer d'abord par notre conférencier invité. En passant, je pense que dans notre trio, les conférences vont être faites en anglais, mais on est là pour répondre ou traduire s'il y a des problèmes. Et la thématique de nos recherches porte sur la stigmatisation. La stigmatisation en général, Dr. Corrigan va parler plus de la stigmatisation qui sont liées aux troubles mentaux, aux troubles... Et Dr. Southall a une perspective très large de la stigmatisation, puis il va toucher différents points. Et moi, les travaux que j'ai faits avec mes collègues portent sur la stigmatisation et la déficience auditive chez les personnes âgées. Alors, sans plus tarder, pour qu'on puisse garder l'horaire, j'aimerais inviter le Dr. Corrigan to come up for his first presentation. Dr. Corrigan has been doing research on stigma for a long time. He's, for us at least, an idol in our field, and we were very happy that he accepted to come today and present. So I will let you, Dr. Corrigan, present your topic and present yourself.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I was asked to continue a discussion you all have about the stigma of aging. I come at this from understanding the stigma of mental illness. I apologize first because my presentation will be in English, and second because stigma is largely a social construct, and the social examples I'll give you are more American, though I understand these are examples that are probably pretty familiar to you as well. And so for the last 20 years, I've become convinced that the stigma of mental illness is as big a problem as the disease itself. Let me be clear up front, I by no means am asserting that mental illness is the same thing as aging, but what I want to do is plant some ideas amongst you about how ideas for mental illness might have translated to the area of aging. And so we know what stigma is. Stigma is a disrespectful image of people with mental illness, people with a labeled condition. For mental illness, it's mostly that they're dangerous. And we don't have to work very hard to know what the advocate's agenda is. The advocate's agenda is to fix it. The interesting dilemma we have in trying to fix it is that lots of people have stumbled into this area. In Canada in particular, actually in my opinion in Canada, who's done it quite well, the Canadian Mental Health Commission for the last 6 to 7 years has been trying to tackle the stigma of mental illness. But sometimes it's led to the dodo bird effect, and I'm not sure who among you are social scientists to remember the dodo bird effect. The dodo bird is from Alice in Wonderland, and in Alice in Wonderland, the dodo bird hosted a race, and at the end of the race, it said, "Everybody is one and all must have prizes," which is a problem for social scientists, because when everything seems to work, you don't know what to do. So, for example, in the psychotherapy realm, the first meta-analyses suggest that Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis worked as well as Aaron Beck and cognitive therapy. And that's a dilemma for us, right? Because what do we do? What do we do as patients? What do we seek out for the appropriate treatment? What do we do as practitioners? What treatment do we offer? What do we do as faculty members? What do we teach people? Even more so, it often leads to unintended consequences, at least in my area, and my area is working on the services for people with serious mental illness. In my area, we tend to know that psychoanalysis actually makes mental illness worse. And so this applies, and what we're interested in today is in stigma, and we're actually at the point now that we realize some approaches to stigma change work well and some do not. And let me give you the take-home, perhaps surprising message up front, is education for the most part is not an effective way to deal with the stigma of a health condition. The effective way mostly is contact, mostly is some interaction between people with the lived condition and the quote, unquote, public. Now, we're in a health setting. Actually, I spent the first 12 years of my life in medical school at the University of Chicago. But stigma and health is fundamentally an issue of social injustice. And so Western history has all sorts of proud examples of social injustice and ways of dealing with it. This is Martin Luther King Jr. coming across the Pettus Bridge into Selma, Alabama, and what the Western world has been tackling mostly successfully in the last 40 years is LGBT rights. But even in the health sphere, even in the disability sphere, there are examples of people actively, effectively dealing with social injustice. The gentleman in the right in the cowboy hat is Justin Dart. He led the disability rights movement in the United States about 40 or 50 years ago. And so the good news has actually been a lot of research done on this. Our National Academies of Science convened a panel about 3 years ago. The National Academies works at the behest of Congress to gather together scientists, and about 6 of us met over the course of 2 years to summarize the status of the research. And there's 2 things. One is the research on mental illness is pretty rich in terms of how to deal with stigma. And 2 is other areas, in particular, an area that's become concerned to me is the stigma on substance use disorder is really quite limited. But the other thing we realize is everybody's running into this space, and in the process, we're making some mistakes. We're making some unintended consequences, and you see it in other areas. So, for example, when Bill Clinton became our president, there was an active effort in the military to find LGB soldiers and sailors and run them out of the military. Mr. Clinton thought one way to handle that was don't ask, don't tell, is if you, Mr. Soldier, did not tell people you were gay, we would not seek it out, we would not drive you out. At the time, it was probably a good idea, but it led to huge unintended consequences. It really suggested if you're gay, you should be in the closet. And a recurring issue I'll come back to is being in a closet is horrible for your health. Or another one, an example of unintended consequences as a fallen away Catholic, is I became very excited when Jorge Bergoglio became our Pope. He decided to name himself after St. Francis of Assisi, in part trying to reorient the church back to our fundamental issues of the poor and the weak. But in his inaugural Mass, he said that these people are least important. Again, sort of giving the idea in the sphere I work with that if you have a mental illness, you're somehow less important than other people. And it brings to mind old ways of doing social justice, which is the old ways of doing social justice is that we in power bestow on the little guy some opportunity, as opposed to what we know now, whether we're talking about people with mental illness or the elderly or people with developmental disabilities, is that they should be given power over their own lives so they can get the opportunities they deserve. Just briefly to orient you more, I am a clinical psychologist. At one time I ran a clinic that had 25,000 patient hours a year, again focusing on serious mental illness. My area is psychiatric rehabilitation. But I come at this issue of mental illness and stigma from a different perspective. Again, in perspective, it's very important to the message I'll give you today, is I am a person with lived experience. So I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, major anxiety disorder, depression. I've been under psychiatric care for 30 years. I've been hospitalized. I've actually taken my meds this morning. And so stigma is not an abstraction for me. Stigma is a personal issue. And so similarly, the only way to deal with the stigma of aging, for example, is people in the aging category need to own the issue and run with it. And so I think the issue from a heart perspective of what is stigma, again, I encourage you today, us to begin a discussion, you to share with me what you know about the stigma of aging. I'm going to give examples of stigma of mental illness, but I'm going to put it in a larger perspective. Sam Keen's a sociologist who wrote a book called Faces of the Enemy, and he looked at how through history groups in power, by the way, frequently white males, groups in power disrespected other groups using the media. Perhaps the most heinous example in American history is what the white majority did to the black minority. Scientists say Negroes still in ape stage. You know, I put this up here for two reasons. One is to remind us quite to the point of what stigma is. Stigma is this gross, disrespectful image of a group. And second, this came from an 1890s medical textbook. So how we can perpetuate ideas of stigma in the guise of science. This is from Nazi-occupied Denmark, showing Jews as rats, another way we easily disrespect a group. Frequently on TV, you'll see mentally ill people as these kind of stupid, silly animals. And what one half of the population has done to the other half, so the harder a wife works, the cuter she looks. If there's good news about stigma, and let's be clear, I'm not foolish at all to think we've gotten rid of sexism or ageism or racism, but if there's good news, I would have seen this in my lifetime and you won't anymore. Not so for the stigma of mental illness. All you have to do in the United States is listen to talk radio. The number of times they talk about psychos and wackos and nuts, and you know it's quite well. How does it show itself? Perhaps in the movies. This is Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street, the most popular cinematic maniac since Darth Vader. Or this slasher killer, this is Jason from Friday the 13th, Part 3. You see it in the newspapers. Now the problem is the newspapers are supposed to be the source of truth, right? But you have the New York Post saying, freed mental patient kills mom, or the Daily News say, getting the violent crazies off of our streets. Now these are tabloids. They're supposed to do this. It's not right, but that's how they get your attention when you're lined up at the store. This is actually a Chicago weekly, very well respected, called The Reader. The story is about a gentleman on the left who was a physician who in drug-induced psychosis killed his wife, was found not guilty by reason of insanity, spent about 10 years in the forensic institution outside Chicago, was ready to be released. His lawyers, her lawyers, the judge thought it was a reasonable sort of thing to do. Ted Klein, the reporter, wrote a reasonable summary of it, but the editor slapped this headline and he ended up spending several more years in the psychiatric hospital. You see it in advertising. This software could get you committed. Crazy Eddie's Record Asylum. To make these deals, you have to be committed. Maniac out of control. This is actually a short distance from the White House in D.C., Lobster Lunacy. Now, sometimes people say, shouldn't we just lighten up? I mean, are we being overly politically correct? The chef does everything but cook. That's what wives are for. Just as you realize that's no longer an appropriate way to sell mixers. So this won the Clio Award, which is the Academy Award of Advertising in the United States. It's a straitjacket filled with nuts. You see it in comics. Gary Larson, who used to be one of my favorite comics. There's two things wrong with this. One is the obvious message on the pad, just plain nuts. But two is that this is a psychoanalyst doing it. And so if a psychoanalyst can be laughing at the guy on the couch, it must be okay for anybody to. Or this, sir, these gentlemen from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission are here to explain new rules on mental illness in the workplace. So I know Canada has the equivalent of what we call the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was signed by the first George Bush in 1990. It was to guarantee rights for people with disabilities, was in place for 5 years before anybody bothered to apply it to psychiatric disabilities. The EEOC came out with these recommendations, and you saw this kind of response. Sir, I'm sorry. S is for Stanley. Stanley's a crazy murderer who likes to murder little boys and girls early Sunday morning. Are you afraid of Stanley? I'm not sure if this translates here. I actually got this off my daughter's shelf when she was 4. This is from a Shel Silverstein book, who was sort of the William Shakespeare of kids' literature in the United States. The big stigma for mental illness, there's no doubt about it, we all agree, the big stigma is that you view us as dangerous. Because you view us as dangerous, you're not going to want to hire us or rent us or be my friend. But the other view is benevolent stigma. The idea is that people with serious mental illness are big, silly kids. Because if you believe that we as adults are big, dumb kids, you're going to have to make decisions for us. So you see in a movie called The Dream Team, this is Christopher Lloyd, Peter Boyle, Michael Keaton. There are 3 psych patients who get away from their keeper in Manhattan, having a silly, zingy day popping around Manhattan. And this actually, we got both sides. We got Jim Carrey and me, myself, and Irene. On the left is the big, dopey, silly cop, and on the right is the big, dangerous cop. I'm hitting both stigmas at once. And this, how to avoid hiring lemons, nuts, and flakes, came from a personnel department at a major business. Now, some of these are old. Is it getting any better? To put this in perspective, you're looking in the front window of a printing company in downstate Ohio. Pretend the woman's not there. So what do you see? See a bottle of booze on its side, 2 legs hanging down, a chair kicked over, sign saying contemplating suicide. Get your notes printed here. If that's not a big enough concern, she's the owner of the company. When they try to explain this to her, she didn't see what the big deal was. Or this. This reminds me, I've been doing this for a while. Even this is an older example. Those of you who like Beautiful Mind, John Nash, the Nobel laureate who had schizoaffective disorder, he would go to Trenton State Hospital in downstate New Jersey when he would relapse, had a fire. Nobody was hurt but structural damage, and the next day the headline said, roasted nuts. So it's important to begin at the heart, because that's what motivates everybody in the room if you're going to tackle stigma. But it's equally important to understand what the research shows. And so Bruce Link, who is who for a long time is a revered person in this space, and his wife Jo Phelan did a population study looking at the degree to which the American population believed people with mental illness are dangerous. Now that's a complex construct that I'd be glad to discuss for you as an aside, but we clearly know the degree to which the public views people dangerous and the degree to which they actually are dangerous is off by about 1,000-fold. And so it's a good proxy for understanding what stigma is, and so they were hoping to find that maybe the stigma from 1956 to the stigma in 1996, maybe the population would decrease by half for people who endorse it, and it actually went in the other direction. It's the stigma over those 40 years got twice as bad. In fact, they followed up 10 years later and it's still as bad, which is a common theme, which also goes back to why education don't work so well, is despite the fact the general public knows a lot about mental illness nowadays, the stigma is getting worse. Why? Perhaps my knee-jerk response is the degree to which we link together these god-awful shootings, especially the ones in the United States, and mental illness. I have a colleague in Australia who did a study soon after Sandy Hook where those little children were shot. He found the stigma in Australia about mental illness got worse after that. And so let's understand what stigma is. I, as a good pedantic professor, have taken it all and broken it down into these issues. These structures down the side is what social psychologists would say is a way of understanding stigma about any group. Let me talk to you about an ethnic group I know, which are Irish Americans. Irish Americans are viewed as that we're all drunks and we neglect our families. In America, if I were to ask how many people understand this, everybody would raise their hand or they would be lying. Because you cannot live in a culture and not learn the stereotypes. Prejudice is agreeing with it. Yep, that's right, they're all drunks. leading to an emotional reaction. I loathe them. And discrimination is, therefore, I'm not going to hire them or rent them or the like. I'm much more interested in the stigma of mental illness. The stigma clear is whether or not you have something as benign as an adjustment disorder because a loved one passed away, or something as evil as schizophrenia. People are going to believe you're dangerous. They're also going to believe you're weak or incompetent, leading to fundamentally a belief that you're bad, and I'm afraid of you, leading to not wanting to hire you or rent to you or the like. An important thing that hopefully I have time to come back to later is stigma is essentially a mark. And this has relevance for understanding, distinguishing the stigma of mental illness versus the stigma of aging. I can look around this room and pretty reliably tell who is in the white majority, who is in the ethnic minority based on skin color. And I can pretty reliably tell who's male and who is female and be sexist as a result. I cannot tell with any reliability who in a room has a mental illness, or for that matter, a comparison group which really helps me understand this is who in the room is gay. The interesting thing about aging is I think we straddle those. Because on one hand, the mark is obvious. If you have gray hair and wrinkled skin, you're aging. But there are aspects of aging that, for example, Kenneth will talk about urinary incontinence, which you can't see. And then there's other aspects of aging which are right on the cusp, which, for example, Jean-Pierre will talk about the idea of hearing difficulty and hearing aids. And so they filter into us how we understand the stigma of mental illness. There are three types. Public stigma is what we, the public, do to people with mental illness when we agree with it. Clearly, if you believe people with mental illness are dangerous, you're less likely to hire them, give them worse housing. Educational opportunities are lacking. Our legislatures never fund mental health programs to the degree they should. And there's a sad irony of faith-based communities where many people turn to support, and many faith-based communities are overwhelmed by the thought. One piece of research that's really quite staggering is Ben Druss, who's a colleague at Emory, looked at 40,000 U.S. veterans who presented to their primary care doctor with rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, high blood pressure, such that they needed to be referred for PTCA. Or in English, the doctor needed to say, you need to go to the cardiologist. And 100% of the time, when the veteran presented with these symptoms and they thought they were normal, they got referred. If the doc thought they had a substance abuse problem based on their chart of what the patient said, it went down to 80%. If the doc thought they had a mental illness, the referral rate went down to 40%. So this is two issues. One is stigma is no longer this sort of socially correct view of injustice. This is a matter of life and death. And two, by the way, this is mental health professionals doing it. I'm sorry, this is primary care professionals doing it. Self-stigma is what happened when we, people with mental illness, internalize a stigma. It leads to diminished self-esteem. I'm not a worthy person, or diminished self-efficacy. I can't do things. More importantly, leading to what we would call the why try effect. Why should I try to get a job? Somebody like me is not worthy of it. Why should I try to live on my own? Somebody like me is not able. And finally, the idea of label avoidance. So as I said, stigma for mental illness is largely hidden. So the only way a person with mental illness will get stigmatized is with the label. And so if I know, for example, that you're a person with mental illness, I'm going to think you're dangerous or the like, and I'm going to disrespect you. And the way you get the label is you go to treatment. And so research quite clearly shows, this is epidemiologic research in the United States, research really quite clearly shows that about half of people with any kind of mental illness, whether it be the most serious like schizophrenia or the relatively benign like an adjustment disorder, will not go for care. And probably part of the reason for that is I don't want to be seen as that kind of nutso wacko person. But you know, erasing stigma is not enough. It's not enough to get rid of racism. Lyndon Johnson, who was our president in the 1960s, soon after passing the Civil Rights Act, did a commencement address at Howard University, which is a historically black university in the United States. And he's talking about racism here that applies well to what we keep in mind. He said, you know, you do not wipe away the scars of centuries by saying, now you're free to go where you want and do as you desire and choose the leaders you please. He really called for the fact that we need affirming attitudes and actions in place of this notion of stigma. And affirming attitudes and actions in mental illness is when we stop thinking that people with mental illness are broken and we start thinking that recovery is the norm, which it is, by the way, for all mental illnesses. Then we will get rid of the stigma. And so how do we fix it? Let me give you some unintended consequences, some ways that don't work well. This is the one that really lights my fire. The easy stuff. You see this all the time. You want to change stigma, just change the words. So I don't know how many of you know, leprosy is now called Hansen's disease. In your space, dementia is called Alzheimer's. Mental retardation in the United States by act of Congress is called intellectual disability. Mania is bipolar illness. Don't get me wrong, names do hurt. The quintessential word in the United States that is painful or wrong is the N-word. In the Eastern world, for serious mental illness, they've made major changes in this. Japan has gone from mind split disease to integration disorder, which Japanese will tell you is a relatively disrespectful way of talking about schizophrenia, to a more benign way. Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, China. I'm in a paper by Norman Sartorius. They've gone through all the ways these countries have changed the words. And this provides a research opportunity, right? What happens when you change the words? By the way, as an aside, in the Western world, there's a push, and you know, we call dementia Alzheimer's disorder, so it's less stigmatizing when you name it after somebody. There's a push to call schizophrenia after Bleuler's syndrome. I'm going to give you a Psych 101 class to see who remembers Eugen Bleuler. This is the guy who, a Swiss psychiatrist who really originally defined the key components of schizophrenia. And so they've done 47 studies on the general population and what happens when you change the words in the general population. And what happens is zip. Is, I don't know what you call it, dementia, Alzheimer's, you're still a pain in the butt, and I still don't like you. Huge changes in providers. For example, I think many of you who are in the psychiatric realm know when the DSM-5 came out, like I knew, you better learn all the new words. You know, for example, in the DSM-5 we cured Asperger's disorder, right? Because it got removed. You better learn the new words if you're going to work in that space. Here's the problem with just changing words. It makes it look easy. Policy change, crazies now on the growing list of politically incorrect words, seems it's offensive to people of a certain mental state, the sanity challenged. The problem with it is people like our National Institute of Mental Health have actually gotten to the point where they don't think it's a problem anymore because we have new words, and so they stop funding. But here's the even bigger problem with it. It leads to word police. The idea of, for example, in my country, there's a big debate about the word mental illness. Is mental illness a disrespectful word? Should it be mental health challenge? So I was speaking in National Alliance for Mental Illness, which is a big advocacy group, talking about mental health challenges, and afterward, a person with mental illness came up to me and threw a major dart saying, I have a mental illness, I don't have a mental health challenge. So there is no agreement on words. And here's the problem. We're all on the same side. Do we want to waste our time fighting over words? And here's the bigger problem. The quintessential person I have in mind when I think of stigma change is my Aunt Lillian, who was a lovely lady who spent her life working at Walmart. She didn't get this. You have one shot at Aunt Lillian. You want to waste your time on what words it is, or do you want to hit more to how you fix it? So keeping an eye on the clock, what I really want to do is throw some major darts at education and then share with you how I think contact is the way to go. It's interesting because in the Western world in particular, we're all quite enamored to education, especially everybody in the room, because all of us did our best to stay in school, in my case, until I was 32, 33, 34. So you think the more, the better, right? But education has its limitations. One example in the behavioral health sphere, I'm not sure if people here know DARE, the Drug Abuse Resistant Education Program. At one point, it was in 75% of U.S. school districts, 43 countries. It was typically done by police officers with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. The idea is to teach them about drug paraphernalia and the risks of using drugs. And one of the rare times the U.S. government spent a lot of money on an area and actually did research. 4 studies showed no difference, randomized controlled trials. No difference for kids who went to DARE versus kids who did not. One study showed significant difference. Kids who went to DARE were significantly more likely to use drugs and alcohol later. An even more recent concern, especially with that guy we somehow elected president, is the idea that vaccinations cause autism. Of course, I'm sure being in a place like this, you realize that's wrong, but there's still significant numbers of parents who agree with that, and of course the problem with that is they're not vaccinating their kids. So people do randomized controlled trials taking these parents and presenting them fact sheets about autism and showing them compelling videos of what happens to their youngster when they get a childhood disease. And what the findings are is there's almost no change in their attitudes about whether or not they think vaccinations work, and they're less likely to actually admit to and agree to have their kids vaccinated, which is a common public health finding, is that there are parts of the population who are very suspect about public health authorities telling them how to act. We actually have it in the mental health sphere. In 1990, our National Institute of Mental Health started the Decade of the Brain. It had many goals, but one is that we showed people PET scans with the occipital lobes, the red in the back lit up, which means they're having visual hallucinations. We would blame them less for their illness. And that's true. Actually, we did an RCT on that. You blame them less for their mental illness, but you also think they're not going to get any better. I mean, it's hardwired in, right? I look good now, but come back in a couple of weeks and I could flip out. And that's the degree to which employers won't hire them and landlords rent to them or provide a good standard of care. I have some great meta-analytic work that proves it. Trust me, I'm a good person. Let me keep to time. Let's talk about protest. Protest is a way of changing stigma. You know, we think that racism and civil rights in the United States changed because of protest, and we have quite compelling examples of Gandhi, for example, in India, and Martin Luther King Jr. How does it work when you do it in research? We'll do research and we'll show people slides like get the violent crazies off the street, and we'll say, shame on you, stop thinking that sort of thing. And here's what happens when you try to do any kind of thought suppression. It leads to a rebound effect. So for example, for the next 2 minutes, I do not want you to think about white bears. This is an old social psych experiment. My hunch is most of you got some version of the Klondike bear bouncing around in your head. Several people, us included, have showed pictures of people with mental illness and said, do not think bad things about that person with mental illness, and attitudes will get worse. And so protest does have benefits once in a while. Our ABC network had a show in 2000 called Wonderland, set in a forensic hospital in Manhattan. In the first episode, somebody with mental illness shot at 4 police officers and stabbed a pregnant psychiatrist in the belly with a hypodermic needle. Advocacy groups got together and they actually were able to get ABC to pull it. But more recently, there's a real place in California called Psycho Donuts. Psycho Donuts has things like the Jason Nut, the Suicide Squeeze. They have Nurse Ratchet in a white nursing outfit. They have a padded cell and the like. And so once again, stigma groups got together trying to get them to tone it down. But again, unintended consequences. In this case, actually the press came out and said things like, look, I'm an advocate of equal rights and a more tolerant world towards all people of different races, religion, gender, and sexual orientation, but that's it. Anything else is just moronic. And so what I think works well is contact. This is Bob Lundeen. Bob and I worked at the University of Chicago together for about 10 years. Bob has a schizoaffective disorder. When he tells his story, he talks about how his childhood was really quite normal. But you know, the issue in looking at Bob is he doesn't look mentally ill. And so you have to qualify, right? And qualify means his mental illness was traumatic. He's been hospitalized 5 times. When he gets manic, it's part of his schizoaffective disorder. He gets in trouble with the police. He's used and abused drugs. And despite that, he's achieved. And so, what does the research show about the effects of education versus contact? Education is in blue. We did a meta-analysis looking at overall effects, attitudes, and behaviors. Contact is in red. This is immediate pre-post effects. You can see the benefits are 2 to 3 times higher. In a separate paper, which is currently coming out, we found that any benefits to education go away a month to 2 later. Effects to contact are still pretty potent. And so how do we focus, how do we package this thing called contact? We proposed a targeted, local, credible, continuous program. I'll obviously talk about those. Notice the whole thing rests on contact. I am a huge believer in LGBT rights. I am a straight male. The best thing I can do in that place is be an ally. I cannot lead the charge. I am a huge believer in women's rights. I'm obviously male. The best thing I can do in that regard is to be an ally. So similarly, efforts to change the stigma of aging need to be led by aged. I'm not sure how you define that. Efforts to be led by mental illness need to be led by mental illness. Who should be the targets? I'd love to wave my magic wand now and get rid of the entire population, but that ain't gonna work. Hasn't worked in racism. And so you need to be much more targeted. In my sphere, my big interest is somebody in psychiatric rehabilitation is to get everybody back to work. And so we do programs focusing on employers. Again, I don't really understand the aging sphere well. I'm not sure if focusing on landlords and employers is where you want to focus, but you definitely want to get some ideas of targeting your approach. Local, you know, I'm in the United States. I'm smart enough to know what Canadians think of Americans. Fundamentally, any idea that comes from Americans is not going to play well here. And so Canadians need to develop their own view towards anti-stigma approaches in their own voice. Even in the United States, we're hugely diverse. I'm from Chicago. That's Lake Michigan sticking down there. I'm at the bottom of Lake Michigan. We're considered in the Midwest. We think everything on the East Coast is pumped up on caffeine and everything on the West Coast is spaced out in marijuana. And actually, this is the state of Illinois. We're in the middle. Again, for those of you who don't know, Chicago's up there in the corner. While we're half the state, most of the rest of the state thinks of us what we think of New York City. And so if you're going to develop something, there's an expression in the Midwest, does it play in Peoria? Peoria is the X there. It's a city in Chicago. But even when you develop it locally, there's no way you can come up with a program for Chicago. Chicago, interestingly enough, the metropolitan area has 10 million people, has 2 absolutely distinct thinking African-American communities, one on the south side, one on the west side, and working with them, you have to develop things in that way. It needs to be credible and continuous. I've not been a member of the U.S. military. I have worked with the Department of Defense and our Veterans Administration, and we've learned that if you're trying to impact Marines, Marines need to talk to Marines, sailors, Army, and the like. We've become very interested in talking to first responders, police officers, and obviously the most effective person to talk to police officers is other police officers. Meeting Bob is good, but once is not enough. And so you need multiple opportunities. And so the secret, the grand plan, the atomic bomb for changing stigma is for people to come out. And one way to understand this is to look at how things in the Western world have improved in the gay community. When I was young, being gay was quite risky, and so you kept it a secret. By the time my kids got to school, homophobia has really decreased. Not Not because in school they taught them it was genetic or hormonal or like, it's because by the time they got to school, they had the benefit of knowing they had 2 gay uncles, and they had gay teachers, and they had gay ministers, and people came out. And so people are doing that on the mental health side, coming out mad. There is a group in the United States called Mad Nation, coming out proud. Famous people have come out. Rod Steiger came out with anxiety, major depression. He got an Academy Award for The Heat of the Night. Patty Duke with bipolar disorder, also Academy Award. Mike Wallace was a very distinguished TV journalist, had major depression. I love showing this slide to my students of famous people who have come out because they go, who are these people? And so they've helped me understand Demi Lovato, who's a singer who's out with anxiety disorder, Jim Carrey, again, who's out with bipolar disorder, Leonardo DiCaprio, who's out with anxiety disorder. But you know, there's a very strong limitation to the effect of famous people coming out. It's a good start, but Thurgood Marshall was our first African-American Supreme Court judge, and when he was appointed, progressives thought, wow, this will really change white attitudes. But it doesn't work that way. You look at him and you say he's not like other black people. This is John Nash. He has schizoaffective disorder. You look at him, he's a Nobel Prize in economics. He's not like other people with mental illness. I mean, he's got a Nobel Prize. He's not like other people in general. And so the degree to which average people have come out is the degree to which you change the dialogue. We published a book about 2 years ago called Coming Out Proud. It's the story of 47 people from around the world talking about their issues of solidarity and being out, in this case a focus on mental illness. And it's also led to a program we called Honest, Open, Proud. Honest, Open, Proud is led by, in this case, people with mental illness. I actually have college at University College London, if anybody's interested, who's developing this for people with Alzheimer's disorders. It's a 3-lesson program. The first lesson is to consider the pros and cons of disclosing with peers. Second lesson is to figure out different ways to disclose. So Jean-Pierre seems to be a nice guy. I can take him out to Starbucks and say, hey, did you see Silver Linings Playbook? What did you think? And if he says, I'm sick and tired of those mentally ill people, he's probably not a good guy to come out to. And the third issue is, it's your story. How do you tell it? One of the interesting things I like to address is this notion of pride. Pride in mental illness, pride in having trouble as an aged person. What's there to be proud of? Despite my own personal journey and able to get a doctor and be a professor, my ability to deal with my disability, which by the way does not go away, is something I'm as proud of as anything else. But there's also an issue of who I am. A geography lesson, anybody know? This is the Irish flag. The green, Catholic green, the Protestant orange. Every March 17th is St. Patrick's Day. One of the best things my parents ever did is name me Patrick, because I don't have to buy any alcohol on St. Patrick's Day. And I just like that as an authentic person. And so similarly with mental illness, I want to change the dialogue. Change the dialogue from the old notion of don't be a mental patient to the new notion of this is who I am. The old notion of, hide the fact you're hearing impaired, which, by the way, I am wearing my own hearing aids today, versus the new notion of this is who I am, accept it as I am. So we have done research on this. We've published 3 randomized controlled trials, 2 with adults, 1 with children. Again, look at me. I look to be an honest person. Time is running out. I'd be glad to give you the references if you like. But more importantly, Honest, Open, Proud has been developed and translated to several different cultures. It is done by Canadian Mental Health Commission. Colleagues in the UK are developing it for Alzheimer's. It has been developed for Tourette's. We are in the process of developing it for people with substance use disorder. There are versions for kids and adults. The developing process is really quite onerous. It takes us about a year and a half to do it. This is the Dutch version of it that we worked with them. Obviously, I don't speak Dutch. I don't really understand Dutch culture at all. So Dutch people did it. We're rolling it out there. And so, again, part of the thing to think about is going forward is how is the stigma of aging different than the stigma of mental illness. I'm absolutely convinced and leave you with people who are aged need to leave this. And they come at this from three different angles. One is the obviousness about it, which is probably similar to black pride, which you see more and more. You see gray pride as an example. Two is the hidden aspect of it, which Kenneth will talk about, which is for the most part urinary incontinence is hidden, and the degree to which people have urinary incontinence and choose to let other people know. And then third is this really gray area, this misunderstood area. So as Jean-Pierre will talk about, hearing aids. Are you slow, or can you not hear? And are you stupid? And do I have to speak louder? And so, speaking to you today, I talk to you from an advocate's agenda, not a research agenda. And in our world, Martin Luther King Jr. is probably the quintessential example of advocates. We have the same thing in the mental health community. This is Clifford Beers, who was hospitalized in Connecticut for a year for a serious mental illness in 1900. Think about that. That was 117 years ago. And he said back then that he must fight in the open. What applies to him applies to our message today. And so I think it's good to end with a prayer from Gandhi, who said, "Let our first act every morning be to make the following resolve for the day. I shall not fear anyone on earth. I shall fear only God. I shall not bear ill will towards anyone. I shall not submit to injustice from anyone. I shall conquer untruth by truth, and in resisting the untruth, I shall put up with all suffering." His message is good for us. My email, our website, most of this can be downloaded for free from our website. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Corrigan. Maybe while Kenny is getting set up, we have time for one or two comments or one or two questions. Does anybody have a question or a comment for Dr. Corrigan?
Way up there.
Okay. I think you better use the microphone. All right, you can speak loud.
All right, just wanted to say thank you for an absolutely great talk. I was wondering, I mean, throughout your talk, you speak a lot about vocabulary and words and how basically, I mean, this and on the social base, like this affects your mental illness and everything, and especially nowadays with, I mean, the younger people right now and teenagers and kids right now have a lot of access to a lot of information about mental illness, and that's wonderful. But it's also a lot of the word crazy is basically applied to everything. What I was wondering is the changes that you're suggesting, is this also something that reflects basically a need for change in the cognitive construct of mental illness? The same way we have constructs, for example, for a bird, where you can identify different things as being a bird. Is the TLC that you're suggesting something that reflects more a need for a change in this cognitive construct, and to have these different examples of people and this contact? Is that something that's reflected?
Yeah, I think the best way to change the dialogue is to meet people. So, you know, you can be very progressive about working with black people, but boy, the whole experience has changed dramatically once you start interacting and working with black people. The challenge for people with mental illness is you don't realize this audience of 100 people has 10 to 15 people with mental illness that need to come out. So I think the degree to which people with the condition live and own it is the degree to which will change the stigma.
There's no doubt that that's the message. That's Dr. Corrigan's message. Is you just have to admit and come out and talk to people. We will move now to the second presentation by Kenneth Southall, who is a researcher here at the Research Institute. Kenny did a master's degree related to stigma and associated with hearing loss. That is PhD Kenny uses a qualitative approach to his research, and he's done his PhD degree was also on stigma and hearing loss, and then he's moved on and looked at stigma in other health conditions, and he's going to talk a little bit about that this morning. Kenny.
Thank you very much. We all have stigmas. Can you see me over the podium? Oh, we don't hear me. Okay, a little bit closer. Okay. It's a little bit cliche, but let me just say that I'm honored to be here today. I moved to Montreal 20 years ago, and 20 years ago I first started just hanging around at the Institute here. I wasn't a student. Sven might remember this. I didn't have any status here. My girlfriend then, who is now my wife, was doing her PhD with Yves Joannette at that time, and I would just come and hang around, and who would have ever known that many years later I would have defended my PhD just down the hallway from here. So it's an honor to be here today and to be speaking on this occasion. My PhD, as JP mentioned, was on the stigma associated with acquired hearing loss. During my studies, I often thought of my father, who had a profound hearing loss. And this centered me, and it gave me a context for all of the studies that I did. And this helped me and encouraged me and motivated me. And so when I went to Ottawa to work with Jeff Jutai, for my postdoc, it was suggested to me that maybe I should look into the stigma associated with urinary incontinence, what I call UI. And at first I was a little bit reluctant because I thought, I don't have that point of reference. I don't know someone with urinary incontinence. And so I was a little bit reluctant until I came across this. On the left is a newspaper advertisement for Southall sanitary towels, published in 1888. It may be the first commercially available sanitary product for women. In part it reads, "Ladies traveling by land or sea, Southall sanitary towels are indispensable. These articles are placed in the front rank of merit as the most valuable invention the century has produced for health and comfort." The front rank of merit. That's high praise indeed. I was emboldened. I had found my place. I needed my colleagues to be aware that I had a lineage, that I had pedigree. I wanted to post it on my door or add it to my email signature. I needed a slogan. Name is Southall, UI is in my genes. Perhaps it's a little bit over the top. But anyways, I decided that I wanted to move ahead with this, and I've thoroughly enjoyed looking at a different health condition apart from hearing loss. The earliest and perhaps most comprehensive examination of stigma was done by Irving Goffman. His words, perhaps dated now, words matter, but he describes stigma as cuts or burns inflicted upon deviant people, dating back to ancient Greece. He defined stigma as attributes that are deeply discrediting, a difference, a sign of deviance from normality, excuse me. This is quite different than the definition that we use in our work from Jennifer Crocker. Crocker defines stigma as the possession of or belief that one possesses an attribute or characteristic that conveys a social identity that is devalued in a particular social context. And as Dr. Corrigan suggested, there are three main components to the stigmatization experience. Stereotype, which is an often erroneous belief about a trait or characteristic. Prejudice is when you buy into that stereotype or you take on an attitude. And discrimination is behaving in a way that is consistent with this attitude. Dr. Corrigan has also suggested that self-stigmatization is comprised of 3 A's. I came across this recently. Awareness of the stereotype, and we're all aware of stereotypes. As young as 3 years old, we're aware of the stereotypes within our cultures. Agreement, Three A's: awareness, agreement with the stereotype, which is basically the prejudice, and application, which is behaving in a way that is consistent with the stereotype. In 1984, Jones proposed that there are 6 dimensions of stigmatizing traits, and I find these dimensions to be quite helpful in distinguishing how one health condition, the stigma associated with one health condition, might be different from the stigma associated with other conditions. So concealability is how apparent the trait is to other people. For example, if a person has once been incarcerated, that's not immediately obvious to other people. The course of the mark. So for a lot of age-related health conditions that are progressive in nature, it changes over time. And so the course of the mark is one of the dimensions that will distinguish the extent to which you're stigmatized. Disruptiveness represents to what extent the trait interferes in social interactions. The aesthetics is the level of attractiveness of the condition. The origin, which is the perceived responsibility in acquiring the trait, for example, a teenage mom. And finally, peril, the perceived danger of the stigma to others in a social setting. So these 6 dimensions, you can use them to distinguish one health condition from another. So for continence difficulties, yes, it's concealable. The course of the mark may become more apparent over time. If you move from using menstrual pads to continence pads to diapers, it's becoming more apparent to other people. Disruptiveness, the smell, and the if you've wet your pants, this can be disruptive in certain situations. The aesthetics, the number of times that women in interviews have described to me the reluctance to use diapers because it sloshes and sloshes, and you can't wear slacks with a diaper. And origin, for some reason I decided to highlight this as well, and I think that it has to do with aging. I think that there's a connection between being blamed for being older, even though obviously it's not your fault. So this contrast with a person who was once incarcerated, yes, it's concealable. It does not become more apparent over time. Yes, it can be disruptive because people may blame you or they may think that you're dangerous. Aesthetics, it's not necessarily unattractive. The origin, yes, people are blamed. And yes, people can be thought of as dangerous because they were once incarcerated. Of the 6 dimensions, many authors have suggested that concealability is perhaps the most important in terms of what you're going to, the lived experience of being someone who has a stigmatizing trait. Goffman described passing as normal, choosing to hide the condition from other people. Again, the language is dated, but I think, again, he's accurate in this observation. Being able to hide a stigmatizing trait from others is a bit like a double-edged sword. On the one hand, there are positive consequences to being able to hide it. On the other hand, there are very definitely negative consequences of hiding it. The positive side, perhaps a short-term benefit, is that you can decide who knows, what they know about your condition, the circumstances that you tell this person about your condition. And so you have a lot of control over what this person knows about you. On the other hand, there are negative consequences associated with this as well, because it's a lot like keeping a secret. And there's a stress associated with keeping a secret. It's cognitively taxing to keep a secret. And so if I've told JP that I have continence difficulties, am I certain that he's going to keep that a secret from other people? So I may be wondering, is he telling other people about this? And so concealability does have the positive side, but it also has a negative side as well. So urinary incontinence may be defined as involuntary leakage of urine that is objectively demonstrable. And it affects 1.5 million Canadians, and most notably for this presentation, between 30 and 50% of women over the age of 65. There are various causes of urinary incontinence: childbirth, menopause. Not surprisingly, you can have an UI, I call it UI, I guess a lot of people do. UI can have important impacts on a person's everyday life. People with UI might experience embarrassment and shame themselves because of this problem. This can lead to elevated stress, isolation, and depression. And the negative emotions and beliefs can lead to delays in help seeking. Kara Tannenbaum, I'm not sure if she's here, but she once told me that people with UI wait between 7 and 10 years before telling a medical professional that they have this issue. In the land of hearing loss, it's a similar number. People wait 7 years before, on average, before they tell a professional about this. And so I guess, once again, there are short-term benefits. You may be getting by during this time. During these 7 years, you may be getting by and being able to cope in everyday situations, but you're not availing yourself to the services and the programs that are eligible for you. And so, as I'm going to describe, a lot of the consequences of having urinary incontinence are preventable. And so if you're waiting and not availing yourself to medical professionals because of the way that you feel about yourself or because of the fears that you have about how other people are going to feel about you, then this is a shame. So we were interested, the study that I want to describe was a qualitative study embedded within a randomized control trial for which the primary investigator was Kara Tannenbaum. In essence, we sought to better understand the lived experience of women who have UI and to better understand how UI stereotypes impacted upon self-management. And so being a relatively new area of inquiry, we adopted a qualitative research paradigm. So the approach that we used was, it's called qualitative description. We interviewed, I had a research assistant who is female, interview 19 women prior to them seeking help for their continence difficulties. On average, the women had leaks 2 to 3 times a week. The interview guide was designed to produce a detailed account of the chronology from the onset of incontinence symptoms, to help seeking, to management of the symptoms. And when the participants described negative emotions associated with self-management or references to stereotypes, follow-up questions were posed to better understand the participants' opinions on these matters. And we used just a generic content analysis protocol to analyze the results. So in the interviews, participants described 2 themes arose from the analysis. It's not so bad, and I'm not one of those. So the first theme, it's not so bad. The participants downplayed the significance of the symptoms. The first sub-theme is favorable comparisons. My continence difficulties are not as bad as my arthritis. My continence difficulties are not nearly as bad as hers. She's way worse off than I am. They were making strategic interpretations of incidents when they had urine leakage. So I drank too much in the morning, or I didn't identify beforehand where the toilet was. It's because of that I had the urine leakage. But also the participants described not telling anyone about, really not telling, I think on average the participants were telling one person about continence difficulties. It was often a daughter or their husband might have known, but they weren't telling medical professionals at all about continence difficulties. And so they were keeping this to themselves because of the negative emotions associated with the condition. The second theme is, I'm not one of those. So on the one hand, while they're saying it's no problem, It's not such a big deal. When we ask the follow-up questions about the stereotypes associated with continence difficulties, this is where their backs went up. This is where they were feeling threatened by the societal attitudes associated with the condition. So when there was reference to the association between continence difficulties and aging, well, this is not something that they wanted to talk about at all. Continence difficulties being dirty. And there's a similarity between treating continence difficulties in older adult, but also treating someone who has continence difficulties as a child, because you learn to toilet train when you're quite young, and this is something that you learn. But now that you're older, I'm having this difficulty again, and people around the person with this condition might treat them like a child, and I'm sure this doesn't come as a surprise. I have two sons that we've adopted from China, and one of my first son, Kolia, I remember the day that I said to him, "Don't touch that pull-up, it's dirty." And I thought to myself, he was quite young at the time, and I thought, am I instilling this stereotype in him? Am I the person who's going to be influencing him? Maybe someday he will have continence difficulties many years down the road, and maybe I'm the person who instilled this stereotype in him. So they were also threatened by accidents, and the participants were threatened by the prospect of their condition becoming worse over time. And so if you think oh, it's not so bad, I imagine this as the stigma associated with the symptoms. They're able to, for the most part, manage the symptoms. And I imagine this as the self-identity. And this is me, this is the symptoms that I'm dealing with it, I'm coping with it. If I'm not necessarily coping with it as well as I might, I have a narrative going on in my head that I'm doing all right. When it comes to societal attitudes like everyone with UI is old, everyone with UI is dependent on others, everyone with UI is dirty, these are the societal representations. And so this is kind of like the social identity. And so I'm still trying to piece together what all of this means, but the contradictory messages of it's no big deal, yet being perceived by others as old, dirty, or a burden was definitely threatening. And I think that we all act in such a way to protect our dignity and self-worth. And so these participants, this is my interpretation, acted in a way to preserve and protect their self-identity as a young, i.e. not so old, and healthy woman. Each person responds to threats differently, and so these results are consistent with contemporary perspectives on the stigmatization process. There's something called the stigma-induced identity threat model, and identity threats are influenced by the stereotype that's being applied, the situation in which a stereotype threat is occurring, and who the person is. And so these stereotype threats were influenced by perspectives on being old, perspectives on being a burden on others. And when there was a situation that was too much of a threat, they had these self-narratives going on in their head. Oh, it's not so bad. I'm doing all right. It's because of this or because of that. So this is just a taste of the work that we're doing. We also have other studies going on the stigma associated with UI. We just published a paper where we assessed the stigma content in UI intervention outcome measures. Also with Cara Tannenbaum, we have a follow-up study. So what was presented today were interviews that were done before the randomized control trial began. We also selected a number of participants who had improved because of Cara's intervention. And we've interviewed those people to assess to what extent the intervention led to changes in perspective on the condition. Also, I'm working with Chantal Dumoulin where we're looking at the benefits of peer support to diminish self-stigma among women with UI. So she has a randomized control trial where she has two groups where there's a one-to-one professional with participant application of the intervention, as well as group. There's a group of women who get together. And Chantal and I have this hypothesis that maybe in the group setting where there are a number of women together, where there can be interactions between the women who have the continence difficulties, where there's contact, and maybe this contact might lead to benefits. And just this past year, JP and I finished a systematic review of the literature, looking at published interventions to diminish self-stigma, and we hopefully have a few papers coming out of that. Here are the collaborators who I've worked with, Chantal and Kara Tannenbaum here at the Institute. This work was financially supported by the ERA AGE competition. And finally, I'd like to thank all the participants who shared their experiences with me.
Thank you, Kenny. Stay here. Thank you, Kenny. Again, while Dominique is putting in the, setting up the computer for the next talk, if anybody has a question or a comment, this would be a good time. No?
Excellent.
It becomes very clear, or one of the things that I've learned from Kenny over the years is that stigma and self-stigma manifests itself very similarly, regardless of what the issue is. So whether it's mental health, incontinence, hearing loss, the way people think about it, then the way they behave about it, is always, there's always a lot of similarities.
I have a question.
Oui?
In relation to the previous,
in
relation to the previous conference, how do you feel about disclosure? Do you think that's something that the woman addressed? Would that? How do you think? Because that's something that's I see that's really challenging.
Absolutely. So the question is out in relation to UI. And how is the disclosure related to what Dr. Corrigan was talking about related to mental health?
It's a good question. And JP and I, during my PhD, we did a study on disclosure of hearing loss in the workplace. And what I've learned about disclosure is that there are many different types of disclosure, and there's a spectrum of disclosure. There's from the one end where it's the person is completely hiding their condition from everyone, to I'm going to tell a few people, to oops, someone has identified that I have this condition and it wasn't by choice. It wasn't by choice at all. So that's another type of disclosure, to I'm going to tell a few people but not others, all the way to someone who's empowered and almost, as Dr. Corrigan was suggesting, proud of the fact that they have a stigmatizing trait and they become an advocate for others. And I agree completely with Dr. Corrigan about contact between individuals is definitely the key. It's knowing that in the study where we were working with Kara Tannenbaum, the women simply sitting in a room with others who have the condition, where not even a word is spoken, the participants described how this was comforting, and there was a sense of belonging with the other women, and there were benefits because of that.
Thanks, Kenny. I would just add that my feeling about this is that overcoming your self-stigma is a journey. And being able to disclose is an important part of that journey. And there are a lot of things that have to happen before you can disclose, and then once you've disclosed, it changes a lot of things. I think we'll have to keep the questions for later because we're running out of time. And also because we're running out of time, I'm going to try to cut to the chase and tell you the story in very... So we've been interested in this topic. I just want... Ça marche pas, ça? I went way too far. I just wanted to mention that some of this work was done with people from here, Kenny and Martin Lagacé, who was also a researcher here, and it was also a qualitative data, and in which we were interested, in which we interviewed older adults, and some had a hearing loss, some didn't have a hearing loss, some lived in rural settings, some lived in urban settings, and we wanted them to talk to us about how they think society felt about hearing loss and aging, and how society felt about aging in general, and then how they felt about aging and hearing loss and aging. And a lot of things came out of this study, but we then did sort of a secondary analysis to sort of see how people view aging and hearing loss. And they're sort of, I'm cutting very quickly to the issues here, but we can entertain questions after. There were sort of 4 themes that came out of this, and for some people there was a positive or a neutral perception about hearing and hearing loss. So for example, the person said, well, I think that if a person uses hearing aids, it helps her and it helps her communicate. Nobody really notices. And the interviewer says, okay, sometimes when I go to visit my mother and she isn't wearing her hearing aids, I say, Mom, go put on your hearing aid. I won't spend all that time repeating. That's it. No way. Go put it on. And she says, oh yeah, I forgot. And she puts it in. And then so the interviewer said, so what are you saying? Do you mean that for older adults who has hearing aids that works well, they look less old? Yes. So the association with hearing loss and aging. The second sort of pattern profile was hearing loss is just one of those health conditions that are associated with hearing. So an example of this would be, I have to realize that my ability to do things are diminished. I don't manage to walk normally. I don't hear well anymore. Well, my capacities are diminished, but it doesn't bother me. It just confines me to isolation. So, and this is just taken straight out of what the people. Another example of this is the interviewer said, how do you react to your hearing aids? That someone suggested you use hearing aids. And they say, well, you really want me to talk about this? And in the end, she says, no, because I don't, doesn't it change the image? No, because it's part of being older. It's part of, that's what aging is sometime. And then she goes on to say, as we get older, we have a little bit of arthritis, we have a little bit of arthrosis, we lose a little bit of, well, I have glasses for reading. I don't need them to drive, but I need them for reading. So again, there's an association with, as you get older, everything just deteriorates. A third profile was very much, which is the one that struck us the most, is hearing loss is associated with the negative aspects of hearing. And so the interviewer said, what has been behind the fact that you did not want to, or did not seem as, don't want to be seen as someone with hearing loss? I don't want to look old, I guess. That is, to accept a handicap is to a handicap that is associated with hearing. So the interviewer said, you said, I don't want that. Well, no. Why don't you want that? We don't want that because it's a synonym of being old. And then another one of the same type is the person said, and then it's like glasses. He said it's like glasses. Well, it isn't like glasses. It's not like glasses. Why? Because, well, tell me. It's not the same. It's a handicap that I say a handicap of old people. So vision is not associated with being old, but hearing loss certainly is. And the fourth category of hearing loss is one point along the continuum of this journey of living. And this is also very striking. The person said, well, it's like everything that makes us have to admit that we are getting older. You can't avoid it. It's a marker. It's unavoidable, you know. You use a hearing aids, hence you're deaf. Well, I don't want to be deaf. I don't want to be old. I don't want to die. It's very obvious. Bang, bang, bang. So again, there's a clear relationship between how they see their hearing loss as a sign of aging and a not positive sign of aging. And so for us, this was very important because one of the things that we've been trying to do over the years is how do you develop programs to help people who have hearing loss overcome their self-stigma associated to hearing loss. And when we look at these data, it says to us that, well, for some people, it's not to help them overcome their self-stigma associated to hearing loss, it's help them accept the fact that they're aging and live well within themselves as aging people. So maybe our intervention programs need to focus more on overcoming self-ageism than self-stigma itself. So that's the short story of a very long research project. And we will stop here so that we can have a little bit of time to talk about this issue of stigma and how it's related to aging. And I think Dr. Corrigan had some very good suggestions and ideas and insights about if we're going to attack ageism and self-ageism. There are a lot of older people who have a very negative attitude towards old people, towards getting older. They're not. And so, how do we help these people see to accept the fact that we're all aging? Comments, questions? Thank you. Do you have any comments or questions related to this topic about do we agree that ageism and self-ageism is an important issue in our... By the way, I really like to thank the people who organized to put a social issue on the first issue on the Congress. Usually it's like the Friday night sometime when everybody's at the bar. Yves.
Yes, thanks to the three speakers. I think it's absolutely important. First of all, just a comment that obviously to the first speaker, it's important to meet people and to have this contact, but maybe the solution is not unique. It's a cocktail solution. And I do believe that education, such as programs, such as Dementia Friend programs, which is very important, started in Japan, the UK, now in Canada, is important to at least inform and have prepare the ground for this contact and to occur with some people with dementia, for instance. But my main comment was probably one thing that was not raised is the role of us scientists in ensuring that the stigma with aging still occur. And one of the things that we systematically do is that we publish articles in which we show how old people are less good at X, not good at Y, going bad in Z. And so just showing how bad things are occurring over and over with aging. Whereas we know, and we've been publishing a chapter with Martin Lagacé, that there's, some things are getting better with aging, at least some concepts that we have difficulty capturing, such as wisdom or even being better at Scrabble. But that is something that we probably have to look at. And maybe one of the first things to do is to make sure that the reference point is not always the young people.
That's a very good point, Yves. And I didn't talk about this this morning for obvious reasons, but there are older people who are living very well as older adults. They say, it's great, I have more time for gardening, I have more time with my children, I have more. So that it's not everybody seems to see the more gloomy side or puts a more gloomy perspective on aging. And so there's things to be learned from them. And I think those are the people who need to be, taking the lead and expressing.
Two things you said. One is, in the mental health side, research is quite clear. The greatest stigmatizers amongst professions, plumbers, lawyers, and are psychiatrists. That is true. That's humorous, but also true. And part of the reason is because we see people when they're sick, and so we don't see people in their full view. And the other part of that is the big rewrite in the mental health world, which you allude to very eloquently, is the idea of recovery. Is the goal is not to be free of symptoms. Everybody in this room is going to have a mental health symptom. The goal is the symptoms are part of your life, and we need to reframe everything is not this ideal sane person or the young person. that life is much more complex, and so the degree to which you're doing that is outstanding.
Yeah. I think a key word in there is reframing. So how do we see ourselves as a different person? And not compare ourselves to when we were 35 or 25 or 40, but how do I see myself and take advantage of what life has to offer me now, sort of thing.
And if I can I just want to mention Dr. Gagné, who is there. She's from the Observatoire Vieillissement Société. And just for your information, these are older people, for older people looking at this ageism and stigma. So this is, I think, a richness here in this center that we, researcher would have benefit to have contact more with.
Eve, I was thinking while we were talking about this, and you can probably know, you obviously know more about this, but now, you know, there are these experiments where they put university students in residential residences with older people so that they interact. Are there also experiences where they put kids like in a nursery, in a kindergarten or in the garderie with that are attached to residential homes, for example?
Well, you're going the wrong way here. You're asking questions for the person but it is.
As long as you don't charge me, then I'm fine with that.
But it is cross-generational contact, including with small kids, is absolutely a source of satisfaction. And satisfaction is contributing to what WHO calls functional health, of course, in aging. And this means that we need more than simply health specialists. We need urbanists, people planning the cities, where you should have a bunch of older people close to a bunch of CPO or places where kids are, just to have this contact. And this would be having a lot of impact just by organizing the cities.
I know that the OVS, for example, has done work or is looking at doing work, intergenerational. I think it's, I'm not sure that I'm saying it right, but the goal is to put older adults in, to interact with them. I think we should stop here because it's time for a coffee break. Thank you very much for coming to our session this morning.
Good. I hope that went well.
No, I think actually, the three of them sort of. Absolutely.